Time now for our political panel. From the Sky News Centre, Labor MP Julie Owens, and in our Brisbane studio, Government MP Jane Prentice. And we'll just start with what's happening over in Lima at the moment. Of course, a UN climate change conference. We know that Julie Bishop, the Foreign Minister, is over there. We also know that Andrew Robb, the Trade Minister, has joined her. Who's missing? Well, let's have a quick listen to the thoughts of Michelle Rowland, who was on AM Agenda this morning.
Adults are not in charge here. This is a group of people masquerading as a government which says that its most senior woman, and in fact its only woman in Cabinet, cannot go to these talks unless she has a chaperone. And you talk about having senior Cabinet ministers there. This is about climate change. Why isn't the Environment Minister going, of all people?
Jane Prentice, just to you first, is it a bit odd that you've got a climate conference without the Environment Minister there?
Not at all, Tom. Number one, international climate change is officially part of the Foreign Minister's portfolio. Number two, if you wanted anyone to represent Australia internationally, I'd pick Julie Bishop first up every time. So I think it's great that she's there. She's on top of this issue. And as we've heard, this is a prequel to the meeting in Paris next year in 2015, and trade has been nominated as one of those issues. Now, our top two negotiators are Julie Bishop and Andrew Robb. Andrew Robb is already over in that part of the world, and that's why he's joining Julie Bishop, and I think we're represented by the two best ministers to do it.
So a bit of a vote of no confidence in Greg Hunt?
Well, look, if we sent a third minister, I'm sure there'd be complaints that we're sending too many people. I'm quite confident that Julie Bishop and Andrew Robb can handle any negotiations or discussions that need to be had. Greg Hunt is busy back in Australia. There's plenty of events to go to. International climate change, as I said, is officially part of Julie Bishop's portfolio. So she is the right person to be there.
Okay, just to the substance of the issue, Julie Owens, because what we've heard a bit from the government today is that until, or in particular from the Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, until 2030 for China, the biggest emitter in the world, it's business as usual. And that's true, isn't it? We've heard a lot about this landmark deal, but there's no reduction in emissions set down at all yet from China, no figure. They can go on as they please for 16 more years.
China's been doing an incredible amount of work on this actually, and they have committed to lowering that trend, which is what they need to do as a developing nation. But in terms of Lima, you know, it's not a question of who trusts who and who needs a chaperone. It's a question of why the Australian government is there and what commitments they will make post 2020. That's the job at the moment. The gossip and the personalities really isn't the point. It's what we're doing on climate change, and that's what I'd like to hear more about from the government, quite frankly.
In terms of Labor's plan, we've heard Mark Butler say, well, he's working with industry and other groups to formulate something. There'll be a price on carbon. But how much more work can we expect, or when will we hear something? Because they've had a few years to toy over this area of policy, Labor in particular. Well,
we've had an emissions trading scheme as our policy since before 2007. So it's been a long-term policy of Labor to put a price on carbon. We do have work to do again. The government's made some changes. They've done some things. We need to sit down and talk about it. But Bill Shorten has made it really clear that over the next year you'll start to hear much more about our positive plans for the future, including those on climate change. Unfortunately, we probably won't hear much in Lima from the current government.
Just quickly, Jane Prentice, a poll out in the last hour or so, an Ipsos Fairfax poll saying 57% of respondents say direct action is too little to deal with climate change. Is that a concern?
Well, I think it's a concern that we haven't messaged ourselves properly to show what we're doing. I think there's a lot of people who need it spelled out in greater detail, but the most important thing is that we achieve what we set out to do, and I'm confident that Greg Hunt is taking us down that path.
Okay, you talk about messaging and getting them out there. I'm going to play you quickly some of what the Prime Minister had to say earlier today. This is on the paid parental leave and, of course, a back down of sorts there. Have a listen.
You can speculate. We do want to see it better targeted. I have been listening to concerns in the community. I've been listening to my colleagues, as you'd expect. Obviously, when I first committed us to a paid parental leave scheme based on a woman's wage, the Labor Party was telling us we'd be in strong surplus now. We're not. That's why we've got to make the money go a little further, put some of it into childcare, as well as a lot into paid parental leave.
Jane Prentice, are you one of these backbenchers that are happy that this decision has been made? And further to that, I suppose, have you been agitating for this sort of thing, this sort of change to be made?
I agitate on a lot of issues, Tom. I'm delighted that the Prime Minister's listening, and he has been all year. It's been a very busy 12 months, and it's not just this issue. I was delighted last week that following representations from various colleagues, he agreed to reinstate the benefits for the ADF. So the Prime Minister has been listening, he's been getting around Australia, and he's responding to the messages he gets. And that's important.
Julie Owens,
it's important to respond.
Okay. Julie Owens, I've heard a lot of Labor MPs, all the way up to Bill Shorten over the last few months, say again and again when they're asked about how they'd bring the budget back into surplus, they say Tony Abbott's got a scrap. He's paid parental leave, the gold-plated one, the unfair one. Now he's doing it. The first thing we hear as reaction is, oh, well, it's a broken promise. He can't win, can he?
Well, it is a broken promise. But the other side of it is that he's promising...
But it's one you wanted him to break.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd be quite happy for him to break it, actually, but we don't know what he's going to do with it yet. But what we do know is that he's now saying the government is going to put money into childcare when they've cut $1 billion from it since they came to government. So it's double messages every step of the way. We don't really know what they're saying they're going to do with it yet, although there is talk about nannies up to $350 a week as half the contribution, which again would benefit families that are able to pay $700 a week to a nanny. So, you know, there's just so much unknown about this. It's a very vague announcement this morning, and, you know, who knows, really.
But surely you can say right now, I'm glad that he's moving in this way, because this is what we asked him to do. You must be happy with that direction.
Well, I'm glad to see it go, but I don't know to what extent it's gone yet. You know, I mean, a person who will tell untruths to get elected doesn't necessarily tell them afterwards either. You know, so I'm still waiting to see what the final sort of policy is.
Jane Prentice, I know you spoke about messaging. If nothing else, the PM's got us all talking about barnacles. Perhaps one of them is the GP co-payment. We'll wait and see. But I was intrigued today to hear the Prime Minister say that he never ruled out a GP co-payment before the election. Now, everyone talks about the rule-in, rule-out game that journalists are obsessed with. This is going to make us ask that about every single policy, isn't it? Because if you haven't ruled anything out, should voters be prepared for anything you haven't, you know, expressly said, I won't do this?
It's terribly hard, Tom, to go from opposition to government not knowing what you're going to find when you get there. Now, the classic was that we were told there was going to be, by Labor, there was going to be an $18 billion deficit. And what we found when we got into government, there's actually $40 billion. As we all know, we don't control the Senate, and so our savings measures are not being put through the Senate, and yet we've still got all the expenditure that was left to us by Labor. So we have a real problem. Labor are actually voting against their own savings bills that they introduced. So we've got a big expenditure problem with the income, and that's the problem we inherit. You've got to be able to change depending on the circumstances, because otherwise you just get into a bigger hole.
The problem, of course, there is Tony Abbott said changed circumstances won't be an excuse.
And the problem is that Jane has the figures wrong. The pre-election fiscal outlook, which came out during the election campaign very early, which are the figures that the opposition at the time should have used, had a $30 billion deficit, and it went to 40 because Joe Hockey gave 8.8 to the Reserve Bank in the first couple of weeks. So that 40 billion was actually known by the opposition. That's not change in circumstances. After PFO, which put it at 30 billion, Tony Abbott said no cuts, no cuts,
Julie,
no cuts.
Julie, you're with the party that said they delivered 4 years of surplus.
Yeah, but you're the government now, and you
campaigned on a surplus that was non-existent.
And you're the government now, and you just said the figure coming into government was 18 billion when it wasn't. It was 30. It was 30, Jane. So you can't say.
But you campaigned on the 18 billion.
Well, your government.
And it was more.
Your government.
It was still more than that, Julie.
Yeah, it is. It went to 40.
Statistics getting thrown around. I'm going to jump in, Julie Owens. When it comes to Labor's strategy in opposition, we know 2014's been the year of no, if you like. At what point is there a pivot in 2015? Do you start outlaying your own plans, or is it a last few months before the election sort of strategy?
Well, for a start, the year hasn't been a year of no. If you actually look at the bills that have actually passed, a large number of them have passed with the support of the government, including a large amount of savings as well. So it's just not true that we're the party of no. There's been incredible compromise and negotiation on a range of pieces of legislation that have been amended on the path to the Parliament.
But no alternatives yet for the things you have said no to.
Well, it's not our job yet to do that. At the moment, it's the government's job. For a start, we can't introduce a money bill, so we actually can't do that in opposition. It's the government's job to actually put forward. Well, it's the government's job at this point to put forward their plans, and it's our job to try and take the edges off them, see if there's ways to improve them. It's not our job at the moment to be the government. It's not. Over the next year, you'll start to see the plans that we will take to the election. But at the moment...
Very quickly, very quickly, Jane Prentice, what do you hope the PM goes away and thinks about over summer? There's a bit of free advice, as they say, in a few opinion pieces lately.
Look, I know the Prime Minister is listening to not only his backbench but the people. As you know, he gets around Australia more than anyone else I know, and he's taking in the feedback he gets, and I'm confident that we'll progress forward next year.
OK, Jane Prentice, Julie Owens, we're right out of time. Thank you very much for your time today, though, on Lunchtime Agenda.
And Tom, shop local. Julie and I both support that.
We do.
Of course. Shop local. We'll end on that note of... well, partisanship. Thanks for watching and stay with us for Newsday.